Good afternoon. I'd like to now begin my 12-hour discourse on the finer points of financing in libraries and how to use Excel. When they called me, they said that I'm the comic relief, so I'll do my best. I want to talk today a little bit about the obligations and opportunities that we have as a library. And I on this graphic, for those of you who can't see, they're nice little Lego pieces. And I have a 9-year-old son who is a Lego maniac by choice and just loves it. And these images, to me, well represent what it is, which is you put together these simple blocks and they really tap your imagination. And I love the concept of taking something and looking at its larger dimensions. And I think right now one of the things that I'd like to talk about is the obligations and opportunities we have, particularly in these difficult financial times. Because I think that a lot of folks look at this, and rightly so, see the burden that's about to come on state libraries and local libraries, and look at it as really what we have to do to step up to deal with a really tough situation for our clients. We've all seen the data, or at least heard the anecdotes, that economic downturns lead to increased usage of library resources. In fact, I was just at Massachusetts where they were saying they were about to enter into their 8th record year in terms of circulation, in terms of usage of the facility. They had hit record numbers 8 years in a row, and they only expected that to get bigger, which is yay. And then they looked at their delivery service and said, oh my God. Right? So I want to talk about what I think are also opportunities here. That if we are in a bad situation, how can we mitigate those for our users? But also, if we are going to get more users from this, how can we hold on to them so that when the bad times pass, their attendance and love and use of our facilities don't? And I think in order to do that, we need to spend a lot of time thinking about what we fundamentally do. So I'm going to present to you, if I may, a sort of common logic of librarianship, which is, as I present one way of looking at sort of how libraries evolved and how we can conceptualize our service, right? So we're going to start with what we need is we get more books, and more books lead to requires an inventory system. You know, and there were simple libraries, and they were in people's homes, and they were in relatively small areas. We could keep track of them. The example I always give is those great used book stores that are up in Maine and such, where you walk in and you just smell the mold decaying off the shelves, and you go up to the proprietor and you say, I need the red book. And he goes, oh, yes. And walks 12 stacks up, and under the dumpster pulls out the perfect book for you that you meant. Well, as we get more of those, we can't keep track of what's in our collections anymore, so we develop inventory systems. Okay. As those inventory systems get larger, we begin to need to segment and break them down, so we come up with classifications. This isn't just a list of all of our stuff. Now you can topically look at what stuff we have. Once you get into the world of classification, you suddenly very much need a professional, because we know that Dewey is not a natural talent. That people are not born speaking Boolean, that we really are twisted and weird individuals, that we understand these things and we have these support groups to get over those things. And that as we have the professionals and as these large classified inventories get larger, it requires automation. We just can't keep track of it in cards. We can't keep track of it in paper. We need to put it on the computer. And once we introduce automation, we can suddenly network our resources together, and we know that networking resources together requires standardization. That now, if we're going to exchange records, we need them all in the same format. So when you look through this little chain of logic, it kind of makes sense. You go, oh yeah, all right. And you can see where, circulation could be connected to this, and we could talk about document delivery to this. And this makes this nice little tree that we can hold lots of things on. But I would like to really warn you about to advise you about the importance of initial assumptions. That if you start with weird assumptions or the wrong assumptions, you end up in very weird places. And I want to give you one example that comes out of Freakonomics, which is just a fabulous book. And it talks about daycare. And in fact, I imagine some of your public libraries are even thinking about offering daycare. And if they don't, it's kind of an interesting concept. But what they were reporting on was a set of economists in Israel who looked over a number of daycare centers. And they were mapping a problem that a lot of daycare centers have, I know ours did, which is that the parents show up late. And when they show up late, you've got to keep staff there, and then you've got to give them the children. You've got to figure out which children's theirs, and, all that horrible stuff. And this was a problem. It cost money, it cost annoying and such. And so what the economists did, as economists always do, is they defined this as an incentive problem. What happens is there's no cost associated with bad behavior, so we all know what to do, which is to take bad behavior and charge people for it. So they introduced a fee structure so that if you showed up late, it cost you money. And what happened was that late arrivals doubled. More and more parents said, oh, $10 to pick up Junior a half hour late? Sign me up. Right? And by the way, if you'll keep them overnight, I'll give you $30. But the initial assumption was people won't pay, or they'll feel pain of these things, and so therefore they won't do it. However, what really happened is, as they talk about in Freakonomics, is a move from a moral hazard to an economic hazard, meaning when I showed up late, I felt guilty. If I can pay my way out of the guilt, I'm all for that. So I would ask you that once again to take a look at this sort of logic of the functions of librarianship and ask you what the initial assumption is, and I would argue that it's a wrong assumption. And the initial assumption in here is that this is the business that we are in. By the way, for those who can't see, it's a book. Actually, several books in a nice arrangement with a red cover. This could take an hour and a half just to describe this. No. I would argue that this is the wrong assumption. The assumption that we are about materials and things, that we are about document delivery, that we are about organizing stuff, that we are, in essence, in the warehousing and artifact business. And you go, of course, Dave, we are not in the book business. Then I ask you to look at your budgets and 98% of your time and tell me which business that you're actually in. So I would say that also this view, this initial assumption, can do a lot. It colors how we see the present. It very much colors how we predict the future. And I just want to demonstrate that by showing you how it colors the past. So here's one sort of historical look at libraries, and we're going to begin with the Library of Alexandria, which was a bunch of great stuff. And when you read about the Library of Alexandria, people look at they talk about the devastation at the loss of the library by the burning by various individuals of which political discipline you're in today, came in, destroyed it. But Library of Alexandria really set a blueprint for the centuries to talk about the power of collecting materials together. Then we hit the Dark Ages and we started talking about scriptoriums with the monks copying the manuscripts, and now knowledge became, we could disseminate that knowledge back and forth. We could preserve it by moving it from multiple items, and then we can skip ahead through Gutenberg and we end up in like Philadelphia where we talk about Benjamin Franklin laying down the blueprint for public libraries. You all have given that story. And it's, Benjamin Franklin, because he was good, but remember, one of the turkey is the national bird, had too many books. And so what he did was he got together with a bunch of friends and says, you have too many books that I want to read. Let's put them all together, right? It's like Judy Garland. Let's put on a show. And so they rented a room and they put all the materials together, and this then became the idea of collecting for the common good and the public good. Now I want to give you an alternative view of that history. I'm going to start with the Library of Alexandria as well, but what I'm going to tell you is that the Library of Alexandria, most of us get it wrong. It was not a building. It was actually a campus. In Alexandria, they had several buildings, and actually the library building was built second. The first one was a temple dedicated to the Muses, and it was called a musée, which is where we get the term museum. And they built the library not to house stuff. That was in the musée. They built the library to invite scholars in to come and talk and think, because they looked at economic development as a question of ideas. And so what happened was the library was a colonnade, an open space where scholars were paid through patronage to come, talk, interact, teach. And if they wrote something down on the scrolls, it went to the museum, where they could consult on a regular basis. By the way, I don't want to criticize one very artifact-centric thing I think we should all implement is that as ships would sail into this popular port, what they would do is send soldiers down to confiscate all the scrolls and materials on each ship, bring them up, copy them, and give the copies back to the ship. I think, those toll booths we have sitting at our states, I think iPod linking and, just download it all. My point of this is that the Library of Alexandria was very much more like a university than it was like a traditional library. And I would take you forward, but not into Dark Ages Europe, where all these monks were busy copying very selective religious texts. I would now actually ask you to direct your attention over to Muslim Spain. Islamic Spain, where the Moors had fabulous libraries. So when the Pope got tired of a bunch of mercenaries picking on themselves and said, go, he said, go free Spain, get out of my hair. So all these mercenaries, which half of them were Muslims anyway, walked into Toledo and said, hey, we freed you. And they all said, welcome. History is interesting how we interpret it. And what happened is, when these crusaders walked in, what did they find? They found 70 libraries with over 440,000 volumes in just one. In just one of these libraries, they found more volumes and knowledge than they had in the entirety of France at the time. And what happened was, as we discovered this knowledge, which was mostly Greek and early philosophical texts that had been translated into Arabic, they began translating them out again. And what happens is these translations began to talk about law and science and physics. And as these translations made it into Dark Ages, soon to be Renaissance Europe, all these rich noblemen realized that this was important, and the more they knew about this, the more power they'd have. And so what they began doing was setting up areas where they would hire tutors to come in and teach them this text. And they called them faculty. And eventually they made standing faculties. And in fact, that model of the students hiring faculty existed right up until about the 19th century when they were training doctors. And so this idea of not just there was a bunch of stuff there, but in Moorish Spain, they were using it on a regular basis to build bigger and better cities and interesting areas. I'll skip over, and instead I'll go back to Philadelphia, but I'll draw your attention not to Benjamin Franklin, but to a fellow by the name of, I swear to God, Dr. Pepper, who worked at the University of Pennsylvania, who said, we need a public library, because Franklin's was not a public library. It was a membership for fee service where people who had collections and money could come and use it. He said, no, this is a social good. He got his uncle to give him a lot of money, and they created the first open access societal good. Now, what I want to reason I walk you through that history briefly is what I want to show you is we're talking about moving from the idea of a collection to scholarship. Instead of talking about dissemination, we talk about action. Instead of talking about sharing, we talk about social good. That really what I would ask you to do is reflect on the power of libraries in terms of societal development, not as knowledge as thing, but as knowledge as action. That what happened was that the Library of Alexandria didn't create knowledge. It wasn't knowledge. It was the people who came to it that did the knowledge. So its knowledge is not in the thing. So here's our Gutenberg Bible. And so it's a page out of the Gutenberg Bible. When many people look at this, you go, that's knowledge. No, it's not. It's a thing. Because what happens is multiple people look at it. Some people might look at that and talk about that as the origin of printing. Oh, that's the origin of printing. That's what started the revolution. Other people might look at that as an artifact to be preserved. Oh, that's valuable. We need to worry about humidity control. And still others will look at it as a religious truth. That's the Word of God. Now, all of them are right. And none of them got that from the object. They all brought it to the object. How we interpret and understand this, the knowledge resides up here, not in the thing. And I would argue that the role of libraries is to exist in that area and to realize that the user defines the context, not the object, and not the facilitator. You don't get to define even what that is. One of the issues, I was in Washington, I was talking with a Catholic university, and the dean was saying that she had talked to a lot of catalogers in the Delaware area and said, you know, the thing they kept coming back to us on the curriculum is we kept teaching students from the catalog to the thing. How do you apply Mark to this? How do you apply Library of Congress to this? And really we need to understand that it's part of a larger conversation. How is the community going to find it? That's how we need to catalog it. So this initial assumption is wrong. And I would argue, by the way, before you get, it's wrong if you put books at the middle of it. It's wrong if you put CDs in the middle of it. It's wrong if you put web pages in the middle of it. The assumption that we're in the thing business is fundamentally wrong. We're in this business. So this is Bob. Hi, Bob. And Bob's our user. I actually like Joan Fry Williams' comment, which is, what do you call the people who come into a library? She made the radical concept of actually asking them. And they said members. They said the number one phrase we want to be known as members. We have a card. We're part of it. We want some ownership. We're a member of a library. I thought that was a great concept. But what I want to do is, if we're not in the thing business, what are we in? And I go to our users and I say, well, what is their problem that we're trying to solve? So Bob here has a question, represented by that hole in his head, which we know some users. who have. And that question really is a gap. He needs to know something. Where did that gap come from? Well, it came from a couple of places. One, it came from what he sort of already knew. That's the fuzzy dots. We'll get to in a second at the top. And it came from some sort of motivation to realize that that's the gap. Either internal motivation, boy, I really want to know how to do this. For example, I had to re-tile my kitchen and I really needed to know how to drywall because if I didn't, it was going to cost me a lot of money. So I have internal motivation. Or external motivation. Go find this out. And anyone in public libraries who's ever dealt with school kids on the weekends knows a lot about extrinsic motivation. What do you need? An article. Why? The teacher said I need an article. What on? Articleness? So we need to know they're motivated, and actually that helps us. I mean, I don't know if we have any folks who sort of holdovers from the academic world. There's this great tradition in the academic world where you know damn well what the freshman paper's about. And so they come in, and you know every article they need to read, and you actually have it under the desk, but you send them through the reference interview anyway. What do you need? An article. Quickly, let's do it tomorrow. Oh, really? What's it on? So Bob has a question. We know a little bit about why. So Bob's going to explore that domain of that question over time. And in that, he's going to change his knowledge. So how does Bob learn? If we're in the knowledge business as libraries, we need to learn about knowledge. And if knowledge is not in the thing, where is it? Well, it's in Bob, but where does that come from? It comes from a series of conversations. So as Bob goes to learn about this, Bob engages in a series of conversations with a lot of different people. And you sit there and go, well, Dave, come on. He read a book. He's having a conversation with himself. And once again, public libraries, conversations with himself out loud in front of desks, bad, I got it. But the notion that what happens is he's going to talk with people who know what's going on, but he's going to do a lot of conversation with himself. If you're sitting there asking, what is this guy talking about? I would ask you, who are you talking to? This morning when you said, should I wear this tie or that tie, who were you talking to? Talking to yourself. We have these regular conversations, this internal dialogue. This isn't crazy. You guys have spent a huge amount of money on instructional design and talking about critical thinking and metacognition and instructional librarianship. What we're trying to teach people is to be more aware and more proficient at this. So through these dialogues, Bob begins to understand and come to these little dots. What are these dots? These dots are agreements. They're ideas. And so what happens is as I'm exploring the drywall, I go through things like I have to deal with tile. Does that involve drywall? Yes, you need a base behind it. Okay, drywall is required for tiling. I now know that, right? So think of it as a series of facts or things you come to. Now, not only do we have that agreement, but we have a link to maybe an artifact. I got this fact from that book. I got this fact from that website. And I have a sense of who I got that information from. We also know from a lot of studies of cognitive psychology, but frankly a lot of living in the United States during an election cycle, that most oftentimes we will disconnect the agreement from where we got it from. Right? We know that often if you repeat something enough, eventually it becomes true. I look forward to the next administration where there will be no such tactics. And I'm an Obama supporter, but even I know politics. Anyway, the idea that they come through this agreement, but you can see what it is. It's this sort of mesh that's going on. We're learning about how things happen. And in fact, that's the business we're in, which is knowledge. And if we're in the knowledge business, we're in the conversation business. What we need to do is facilitate these conversations. Maybe facilitation happens by giving them a resource that sparks the later conversation. Maybe it's giving them a place to have that conversation through public rooms. Maybe it's giving them a blog that they can post their information to in a community group. Maybe it's instructional sessions, instructional seminars, but I bring the point that, one, it's about knowledge, it's about conversations, and it's also the fact that knowledge is relational, that knowledge is not these nice little buckets. I wish I lived in the days when I could have been a professor where I would show up and I would expect everyone to be absolutely silent, and I would engage in the bucket model of education. You know this one? You are all empty buckets, and I'm throwing bricks of knowledge into your head, which they're going to rattle around, and then you'll be centered. Right? We know that's not true. There's an engagement that goes on. There's a connection. And in this logic, now it becomes a different set of logic. The logic starts with, first of all, the user is in control. It's not that we have a bunch of books that lead to classification, that leads to professional, we have users that have needs that lead to structures and tools and systems and services. That it's all about learning. This idea that somehow our users come into us and, oh, that's the teacher's job, or that's the professor's job, or that's this. We're just the librarians. All we are is the handmaiden of education. We bring them forth to the books, send them and say, there you go. Right? A lot of what we do in librarianship is about access. But I would argue that access is insufficient for learning. It's like taking my 5-year-old, walking them into the stacks and saying, I'll be back next week when you can read. Right? We know that doesn't happen. In the old days of technology, people used to say, I want a book and not a computer because books are intuitive. Yeah, we only spend the first, 8 years of public education teaching you that interface, right? It's called reading. And so this notion that we can just give them access to something and expect them to get it isn't enough. It involves, one, access to the conversation, knowledge about the conversation. So if someone wants to learn about something, and you put them in a nice room with lots of people who only speak another language that they don't, they're not going to learn. Or you put them in front of a computer and say it's online and they don't know what a mouse is, they're not going to learn. Right? So we need to give them the necessary knowledge. How many people have been on the committee? This is the committee that you joined that was formed in 1892, and someone is actually on the committee from 1892. And they're the historian, right? They're the ones that when you say, I think we should try a blog in the state library, they go, in 1928 we tried blogging. We did it with slate tablets and postal mailing it around to people, but it didn't work out well because the envelope always smudged the chalk. This history needs to come in here too, right? We need to have a history, a memory of what's happening. We also need a safe environment. The other thing that historian is doing is he's creating an unsafe environment for you to contribute your knowledge to. And how are our libraries about creating safety? Well, we often talk in public libraries about physical safety. We get a lot of after-school kids and we provide physical safety, or a haven. A lot of our principles about intellectual safety, that you can pursue a topic to its logical end without feeling like you're going to get a knock on the door from Homeland Security, right? That's a sense of safety. There's also lots of questions about safety. And the last one is motivation. Understanding why they're looking for it and recognizing it and making it available. So it's all about learning, which also means, by the way, you have to evaluate yourself on learning too. And that learning is a collaborative conversation. And that means that you need to be part of it and they need to be part of you. And so I really, really, really hated that publicity we put out about libraries are the best search engines. No, you're not. You don't want to be. Yes, I can return 50 million pieces of crap in under a second. Is that really the competition you want to have? Because, you can't throw paper faster than Google can, right? What we want to be talking about is facilitating conversations where Google may be the best tool, a book may be the best tool, people may be the best tool, your best friend may be a best tool. We can have this conversation. And the true facilitation means shared ownership. How many people have talked about wanting more teens in your library? How many teens are on your board of directors? Oh, so you want them to come in, but you don't trust them to tell you how to run what you're doing. Makes sense. This notion of when we want to work in collaboration with people and they say, well, that's great, a library's about stuff, right? I got a bunch of stuff. Don't correct them. You'll figure it out later. What you do is you say, here's your shelf or shelves. Now, a lot of librarians freak out because they go, oh, do you know what it's going to cost for us to extension those and we're going to control them? I say, no, this shelf. Their job is to organize it, keep it, maintain it, provide security to it because that's what they want to do. And if they want your services, then you can negotiate that service. That means shared ownership, and that we need to invest more and more in tools of creation over collection of artifacts. When people come into our libraries and they're learning, they're in a creative act. They're not in this consumer-producer thing, throw it away. The distinction between they consume our stuff or they produce stuff for us, throw it away. Because when you're in knowledge building, you are producing and consuming simultaneously. Because you're seeking agreements. And so if someone it's like why we provide those stubby little pencils that are always too dull next to the crap paper that we can't use, next to the catalog. Because when they find it, they want to scribble it down, right? Well, what else do they want to scribble down? What they found, what they learned. Well, they'll bring their laptops. Great, can you plug it in? Well, we don't have plugs, but that's fine, right? This idea of it's a creative process. And if they want to sing it, where's the ability to podcast that out? And if they want to write something, where's the quiet writing area? And when they want to shout it out to friends, where's the loud shout out area? This idea of look at the people who come in your door, not as people who are consuming your product, but as people who are in the middle of a production process and they are making you part of it. How can you facilitate that process? So we end up with this sort of view of it, and we know that this can happen in multiple locations. We know it can happen in a digital world, so that they're doing this in a digital world. We know it can happen in a physical world, so they come to look at physical resources in hybrid worlds. They come to our library to search online databases, etc. I want to talk just quickly one implication of this, and actually I'm going to skip through this. You might have seen a press release on something called reference extract, and the idea is once we have this sort of knowledge, once we understand it, what can we do with knowledge that we do differently? Well, think of it right now that someone comes in and they need a book, and we interlibrary loan for it. And there are lots of statistics that show that if you interlibrary loan a book, instead of getting it, you just buy it, the circulation of that item will go up, some 20%. So, we buy it, we consume it. But if we then know why they needed it, link it to the next resource, and link it to the next resource, what we can begin to do is tap it. And so one of these conversations that's going on in public libraries all the time right now are reference conversations. People come in and they don't just say, give us stuff. Right? We go through, Sarah Weissman once said, a reference interview is putting the patron on a rack until they tell you the truth. Right? So we go through these engagement processes that are really sort of interesting and sophisticated, and what we end up with is this wonderful resource that talks not only about the stuff we recommended, but how it relates to a given question, how they relate to themselves, and what do we do with that data? We throw it away. What if we tapped it? Because we already know that, for example, library websites and librarians are seen as immensely trustworthy agents. And we already see that the revolution of Google brought was not more documents. It was the idea to realize that items are not standalone on the web. They link to each other. And if we take advantage of how things are linked together, you get powerful results. So they came up with this thing of PageRank. The more a page is pointed to, the more probably relevant it is. And we can take all the pot shots we want on it, but the truth is it works remarkably well. But we know it can be gamed. We know that it tends to lead to commerce sites. We know that bloggers tend to throw things off. What if we did the same thing, but instead of just taking pages pointing to pages, we did what reference librarians pointed to? And we do reference ranking, where we tap all of these things, and so when something pops up to the top, it's because the reference librarian, the librarians, the credible experts, think it's the most useful resource. Why not? And we can build search interfaces on it. But we can also take this information, this how things are connected and by whom, and we can build a whole new series of services off of it. We can build a search engine off of it. The person who said that libraries should cede the search domain to Google are wrong. There's room for lots of people, and we know a lot about it, and we need to retake that space. We can embed it so that you do a Google results in the top 10 hits. The third one says, and this is a library recommended site. So we can provide services back out to those folks. But I don't want to go too much farther into the details of this. I put some links here where you can find out some more of how we imagine the software. I want to talk about the pressure for participation, the larger scale of this. Which is right now we know that people need to be active constructors of their knowledge. If this is an active creation process, if it's knowledge, they walk into a setting, whether it's walking online, walking physically, they expect to be engaged in conversation. How conversational are the catalogs? Well, they put in a term. We give them a bunch of stuff. What if they don't like the bunch of stuff? Hopefully they'll put in another term, right? That's not a conversation. That's a rapid failure rate. And so what we need to talk about is instead of just assuming they're consuming, so they give us a well-formed query, yeah, right, and we give them back everything that's perfect for their query, yeah, right, we look at it as an ongoing conversation. People looked at bookstores and said, I want to tell you what I think of that book. Amazon, right? People looked online and they said, I want to share my pictures and I want to have a conversation about Flickr. When you look at Facebook, what you see with Facebook is not vanity searching. You see people who want to connect into a conversation and they want to shape the systems around themselves, right? I would argue, though, that this pressure also falls upon us, that there is a pressure on us to participate within our communities, that conversations and learning are ultimately about change. If you want to look at what the role of library is, I take a lot of umbrage to the statement that libraries are conservative organizations. Because if we're in the knowledge, we are radical organizations. Because learning and knowledge is a radical activity because it means, fundamentally, change. It means changing for the better, but it means change. And if we're in the facilitation, we are neither invisible nor are we unbiased. Facilitation is to shape a conversation. If someone comes and asks you a question and you turn to start typing or you turn to reach for a book, you have shown a bias. If you show them well-published resources versus open web resources, you've shown a bias. We are biased. This is how humans work. You have to, or else you wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to get in the elevator. You don't sit there and analyze, well, will it go up, or will it go down, or will it fall, or will it work? You trust it. You have a bias towards trust of technology in that case. The great thing about librarians is that we're taught and we know and we have a mission to set aside our bias for a user's sake. That's what makes us amazing and trustworthy agents. The mission of the library then becomes to facilitate knowledge creation of its community through conversation. It's not to provide access to the world's resources. It's not to provide access. It's to provide knowledge and better decision making, right? And we need to change the community for the better. That ultimately our role is not to look at a community, wait for them to tell us what they need, or wait for them to come and get us. It's to have a point of view about what the community will take and actively go about making that happen. And engaging in conversations with the community about what that is or what that isn't. And you know what? They listened to us. When Carnegie built libraries, what did he build? He built temples. Temples to books, rightly so. But why? Because libraries and public libraries are aspirational institutions. When communities build public libraries, they want to show off the best of them. Right? The public library, they want to show off. And what do they put in there? You. And what else do they put in there? The main mission of knowledge. You are the aspiration of your community. They will listen to you as well as you listening to them. So libraries must become agents of change. We can no longer hide behind our collections. The statistics that we present about we have so many volumes and so many volumes, who cares? How much lives did you change and in what way? How did you improve your community? What's your community's top concerns? Is it youth violence? Is it economic development? What did you do for that? How can you demonstrate that skill? We can no longer serve from the side. I think a lot of times public libraries show the way by showing their back. That the idea is someone comes into the library and we turn away and we say, there, that's what you need. And so what we do is we bring in everything that the community doesn't have. Well, these are the books that you should read or shouldn't read or wanted to read but didn't have. What about projecting out? When they go to the state library, how much of the state do they learn? When they go to the Onondaga County Library, how much does someone outside of Onondaga County learn about Onondaga County? We talked about in Philadelphia with musicians podcasting their recordings and becoming the place where all this music becomes available. People come here not only to learn about the rest of the world, but in partnership, we become publishers of the community. That we must be active and participate in the improvement of our communities and larger societies. We are perfectly situated to do this. What do I mean by that? That's a good question. We function as authorities, not authoritarians. This idea that all the good stuff's in the library and all the crap's on the internet has to stop. Because if you're telling people what's good and what's bad, you're not getting the point that that's not in the thing, it's in the use. And that's where we need to be. Good uses and bad uses are interesting conversations to have, and for what purpose and for what context. We are honest brokers and facilitators of conversations. We're tool builders. This notion of shying away from building the next catalog or building the next interface because, oh, that's tools, we don't do technology, is nuts. If you show me a tech spec and I'll show you the MARC and AACR2 and I'll go toe-to-toe for which is more obscure and complex. Folks, 3-letter acronyms, we can shout down any Cisco engineer later. Trust me, we do it all, right? We're tool builders and we need to stop waiting for other people to invent the tools and consume them ourselves and talk about how to make the next wave. We need to provide connective tissues to our organizations. One of the things that just astounds me as I look in the public space is that there are very, 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 very few credible, trusted, connective tissue to every part of our communities. City Hall does this, and social services does this, and economic does develop, and libraries do it all. That's an amazing power that we have, that we are really now the ones who hold this community together through knowledge and through information. We need to be part of the great conversation. Imagine if 123,000 libraries shared the conversations that they were having, networked them together instead of networking the stuff together. Instead of how many copies of the Great Expectations do I have, how many people were talking about youth violence in Buffalo, how many of them were talking it in Michigan, and how can we share that information? Because you know what? Maybe they learned something there. And how can we build these collaborations and connections? That's what OCLC is great for our stuff. We need the WorldCat of ideas now. And this is an interesting role for state libraries to play. I know you guys are getting more and more knocks on the door as budgets get tighter and saying, license everything for us, please. You got a budget, you take care of it all. I know that. But think about what you could do by connecting the knowledge of the organizations. Think one tactically. The ability that when you go up for that testimony about your budget, you don't just have to say, well, we got these many books circulated, we got this. And you don't have to get a couple of anecdotes wondering if, little Sally had a great time at her Brownie League and that was... What if you could reach down and say, on Thursday, the mayor of so-and-so walked into his library, received this kind of assistance, engaged in these conversations, turned into these policies that had this economic impact, and that was the value of the library on Thursday. You want to know what it was on Friday? Let's look at another one. That kind of reaching down doesn't come from the stuff that we shared. It comes from the conversations that we have. We all as librarians have the story. Right? The story, that's the story that you pull out after that god-awful last committee meeting, and you sit there and go, why am I in this job? And doom, and you bring out the story. And that story may be simple. I remember one person's story was a student asking them, do clams sleep? And they talked about how this whole process they went out, and by the way, sorta. They went into this whole process of trying to figure it out, but that was her story. It was like, there's this kid who was really, the other one is, this fifth grader came in and told me about the book, and it just glowed. Very few of these stories start with, and I cataloged a book, and then I went into this committee and I took notes, right? That's not the story we tell. Look at the stories that you value in your own life and your own contributions, and I will guarantee they have a conversation in them. They are about people and talking and not about things. Right? Millions of conversations being shared together and creating an infrastructure for the marketplace of ideas. When you talk about the infrastructure, what? Oh, we have the stuff for people. No, our community has a couple ideas. They're called, how we get through life, and we are the ones who can provide that basic infrastructure. But we must be prepared to do it. We must think of librarians as radical change agents, not as nice people, right? I love the lie. Don't be loved to death. You know what being loved to death is? You're at a cocktail party, you tell them you're a librarian, and they go, oh, I love libraries. When I was a boy, I went there. And you go, great, oh, it's good, you love. Have you been to one recently? No. Will you vote on the tax thing? I didn't know that was coming up, right? This idea that we don't want to be just loved because we're neat. We want to be in their face demonstrating our value every day and co-equal members of that conversation. We need to fix our innovation cycle. Repeat after me, new hires are not the solution, right? Oh, we're going to do blogging. We'll get the new librarian to do it. The new librarian's like Betty. She's 98, she's on a ventilator, but she just came out of library school, so she's ready, right? We need to fix our education system. The idea that somehow everything that all of my wonderful state librarians here learned in 2.5 years at the beginning of your career, how many years ago? Yeah, that worked well. You can't be a physical therapist or a barber in this country without mandatory continuing education. But the ideas of our community only deserve 2.5 years at some point in the history. Right? We need to fix our innovation economy where our marketplace of vendors need to understand that they don't get to have all the good ideas, that we all have good ideas. Ultimately, what we're talking about is an obligation to lead. We must innovate from our core principles, which I tell you are about knowledge and not about things. We must question tradition every day. The two most important questions we must ask is why and why not? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? And if you come up with an answer, keep doing it. And why can't we do this? And ask it out loud for a change. Well, why can't we do this? The lawyers won't let us. That's state records. Did you ask the lawyers? No, I just know they don't let us do this. Right? Ask. And if they won't let it do it, fight and figure out another way to do it. Right? You get a patron coming in your door going, great, you're starting a blog tomorrow because the state won't let us, and I'll write it for you, but go ahead. Right? Figure it out. Hold the visionaries to account. Just because Dave can come up here and talk very excitedly, fast, and loud does not mean I know what the hell I'm talking about. We are a group that loves our charismatic leaders. I mean, for God's sake, we made Dewey famous, and he was a misogynist anti-Semite from upstate New York. I mean, I love Chuck McClure. I love him dearly, but come on, a rock star? Really? Right? This idea that, Stephen Abrams, Dave Lankus, we're going to go up and tell you what we want, but you better ask us, where's your data? Where's your theory? How do you know it's going to work? And let's try it. And you need to become a mentor. And a good mentor is one who hopes that the person they're mentoring outdoes them. And that's a really trick. The idea that I want you to be better than me. That's the kind of mentorship we want. Because ultimately, the people in this room, you are the future of libraries. If, as Slate.com said, we're all obsolete in 10 years, it's your fault. It's my fault. It's our fault. Because we can't sit back and assume that history happens to us and future happens to us. We need to shape it on a regular basis. I'm tired of too many librarians telling me they won't let me do it. Who's they? Oh, they is the library administration. As if somehow library administrators are as fixed in stone as the stones. Right? That somehow, I didn't want to take the management position because I love people and that's all committee work. Well, screw it. If you want to have a change in this organization, you take the job. And if you don't like your boss, you try and replace your boss. And if you can't, you go somewhere else. This is the kind of radicalizing we need to do of a community that questions everything we do and fights every minute for what is right in a constructive and intellectually honest way, but it's someone who does not passively look at librarianship as a job, but looks at it as a vocation and a mission, because ultimately that is what we are in. We are a noble, noble profession. We don't use that term enough. This isn't just a question about being a good or a nice, ennobling profession. Our task is nothing less than the improvement of society as a whole. Our task is nothing less than every day working to make lives better. That this country is better because we're here, this state is better because we're here, this community is better than what we're here. And if they don't hear it, we need to shout louder. Don't love us, respect us, and need us, and use us. That is in-your-face librarianship, and that is the goal that we must be in, because that initial assumption that it's about the books don't shout. We do. And there's a reason, because we have the passion to do this on an everyday basis. I thank you very much for your attention.
Tell us what you really think.
My mother always asked, how did an Episcopalian from Ohio become a Baptist preacher?
Well, that's just what I needed to get into the afternoon. So thank you